My unemployed husband wanted me to give a portion of the inheritance I had received from my grandma to my adult stepdaughter, who was apparently about to become a single mom, so I said yes, but a day later, I found shocking receipts in his laptop. So I dug deeper. Now he is begging me to stay, realizing that his time of freeloading is up and he's on the brink of being homeless. When I first met Alex, he seemed to have big dreams. He had this aura of ambition, a sense that he was destined for something greater than the average person. I remember thinking that he was the kind of person who wasn't afraid to take risks to chase after something bigger than a conventional 9-to-5 job. But despite that drive, Alex had a consistent struggle. He could never seem to hold down a job for long. Even early on, it was clear that this was a pattern with him. He'd land a job, but before long he'd be looking for the next opportunity. Dissatisfied or frustrated with his current position, Alex would often justify this behavior by saying that he always wanted to be his own boss, to run things his way without having to answer to anyone. He didn't like the idea of working under someone else's rules or being just another employee in a big company. He craved freedom, the kind that only comes when you are the one in charge, but that desire for independence seemed to come at a cost. Because of this, working for others was always a challenge for him. He would frequently clash with his bosses or grow uninterested in the jobs he took on. It seemed like no matter where he worked, he found reasons to leave. Sometimes it was because he felt the job wasn't offering him enough growth, or other times it was due to conflicts with his superior. This constant dissatisfaction meant that Alex was always switching jobs, sometimes every few months. It was like he was on a never-ending search for the perfect situation, one that would align with his aspirations. At the time, I didn't see this behavior of his as a red flag. I was young too, and I figured that everyone had their own path to finding where they fit in life. I believed that Alex, with all his ambition, would eventually figure things out and settle down. When Alex and I moved in together, everything in the beginning seemed to be going smoothly. He seemed responsible when it came to money. He continued to cover his own bills, and whenever we went out, he would always insist on paying for our dates. I appreciated that about him. I never really had any complaints because at the time, it felt like we had an equal partnership. Our relationship felt solid, and we were building a life together that I was happy with. The real issues only began to surface after we had a child of our own, a son. That's when things started to unravel in ways I never could have predicted. One day, I stumbled across something that would change everything. It was completely by accident, but I ended up seeing his annual bank statement accidentally. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't looking for anything specific, but there it was right in front of me, regular payments going from his account to someone always on the same date. Confused, I confronted Alex about it, and he tried to first spin it on me and accuse me of spying on him. When I firmly asked him again, to be honest, he broke down and confessed that years ago, he and his then high school ex-girlfriend had gotten pregnant, but he didn't want to be a father that young. So all he ever did was send his ex child support every month, and he had never formed any relationship with his daughter Jasmine. I was completely taken aback by this news. He continued to tell me how he had been too afraid to tell me the truth because he didn't want to lose me over this. He begged me to not leave him and reiterated just how much he loves his life with me and our son. At that moment, all I could feel was anger and betrayal. How could he say that he loved me and wanted to build a future with me yet hide something so important out of fear? His attempts to justify the lie only made it worse because it wasn't just about the secret itself. It was about trust. He had shattered the foundation of our relationship by keeping this huge part of his life hidden from me for so long. He had been sending money every month to support this child, and I had been completely in the dark about it. On one hand, I was relieved that he was at least taking financial responsibility for his child because that's important. But on the other hand, I was furious, and rightfully so. It wasn't about the child support. It was about the fact that he had hidden such a huge life-altering secret from me. This wasn't just some small omission. This was a child, another human being that existed because of him. How could he have thought it was okay to keep something like that from me? As furious and hurt as I was by Alex's betrayal, I ultimately made the difficult decision to stay with him. After thinking things over, it wasn't an easy choice, and I grappled with a whirlwind of emotions. But at the end of the day, I convinced myself that staying together was the best thing for our son. I didn't want to disrupt his life or take away the family structure that I thought was so important for his well-being. I reasoned that despite Alex's deceit, he was still a good father to our child, and that had to count for something. Even though I was hurt, a part of me also felt for Jasmine, Alex's daughter from high school. I couldn't help but think about her growing up without her father being an active presence in her life. It felt wrong for her to be deprived of that relationship, especially since Alex was clearly making financial efforts to support her. So despite the pain Alex's secret had caused me, I started encouraging him to try and meet his daughter. I told him that if Jasmine's biological mother was open to the idea, he should see her at least once or twice every month. I felt like it was the least he could do for her, and honestly, I felt a sense of guilt on my own part, almost as if by staying with Alex, I was somehow contributing to Jasmine not having a proper relationship with her dad. However, I made a conscious decision to keep my distance from that situation. I didn't want to insert myself into the dynamics between Alex, Jasmine, and her mother. It wasn't my place, and frankly, I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to handle it. I had my hands full with our own son, and I figured that whatever relationship Alex chose to have with Jasmine would be between them. I had envisioned maybe some visits here and there, but nothing more than that. I certainly never thought that we would one day have to live with her under the same roof, but I guess life has a way of unfolding in ways we can't anticipate. And looking back, I can see how naive I was to think that. After Alex and I eventually got married, our lives took a sharp and unexpected turn. Jasmine's biological mother tragically passed away in an accident. It was a shock, but what blindsided me even more was how Alex handled the aftermath. Without even discussing it with me, without so much as a conversation, he decided to bring Jasmine to live with us. He just showed up at the house with her and informed me, matter-of-factly, that Jasmine had nowhere else to go and will be staying with us indefinitely. I felt completely blindsided and disrespected by this monumental decision of his. Naturally, this led to a huge argument between us. I was furious not only because he hadn't consulted me, but because I wasn't ready to take on the responsibility of raising someone else's child. Caring for your own child is one thing, but taking on another, especially under such emotionally charged circumstances, is something entirely different. I had no emotional connection to Jasmine. She was practically a stranger to me, and now I was expected to welcome her into our home, our lives, like it was no big deal. The whole situation terrified me. Alex, on the other hand, was surprisingly trying to convince me that this was somehow a good thing, that it was fate or some divine plan. He even went so far as to say that since we had always talked about wanting another child, this was God's way of gifting us one. It felt like he was using Jasmine's tragedy to justify his decision and ease his own guilt. But for me, this wasn't some blessing from above. It was an unexpected and overwhelming situation that I had never agreed to, and it felt like my whole world was being turned upside down without my consent. Over the next few days, Alex and I continued to bicker while Jasmine stayed with us. The tension between us grew so intense that I couldn't stand it anymore. The constant arguments, the feeling of being unheard, and the weight of the situation pushed me to my breaking point. I needed space to think, to breathe, so I packed the bag for me and my son and left the house. I went to stay with a friend for a while just to get away from the chaos and figure out what I really wanted. It was a hard decision, but I felt like I had no choice. But even while I was away, I couldn't escape the pull of my own family. While Alex repeatedly begged me to come back, my son also kept asking for his dad, and it tore up my heart. No matter how angry I was at Alex, I couldn't deny the bond they shared, and I didn't want to punish my son by keeping him away from his father. After a few days, I gave in to that pull and returned home. When I got back, Alex accepted his mistakes and told me how much he regretted not talking to me first before bringing Jasmine home. He kept trying to convince me that things wouldn't really change that much if Jasmine continued to live with us and that she was going to be completely his responsibility. So I never had to worry about her in any way. In the end, despite all my reservations and the intense arguments Alex and I had, Jasmine did end up staying with us permanently. I knew that her situation was tragic and I couldn't deny that she needed a home. But that didn't make it any easier to accept, and it certainly didn't make living with her any easier. From the moment she moved in, things were challenging far more than I had anticipated. Jasmine was difficult in ways I wasn't prepared for. She was filled with anger, confusion, and resentment, and I became a prime target for those emotions. It felt like she blamed me for everything that had gone wrong in her life and was always very rude to me. One of the hardest things to cope with was how she constantly blamed me for her parents not being together. It didn't seem to matter to her that I hadn't even known Alex when she was born, or that her mother and Alex had dated way back in high school and had broken up. In her mind, I was somehow responsible for the fact that she grew up without her father, and no amount of reasoning or explanation could convince her otherwise. To make matters worse, she harbored a deep resentment towards the fact that my son had a mother, me, while she had lost hers. I understood her pain. I truly did, but it still hurt to be on the receiving end of her bitterness every day. Between my full-time job and taking care of my own son, I made every effort to be there for Jasmine as much as I could without crossing any boundaries. I wanted to help her adjust to feel like she was part of our family despite the difficult circumstances. But no matter how hard I tried, Jasmine wasn't receptive. She made it clear that she didn't want me in her life. The more I tried, the more she pushed me away. Meanwhile, Alex's reaction to all of this only added to the strain. He would come home from work and act as if everything was fine in the house. Like the tension between Jasmine and me was something that could just be swept under the rug and forgotten. He wasn't around enough to see the full extent of the challenges I was facing with his daughter, and when he was actually home, he seemed to want to avoid any conflict altogether. It was incredibly frustrating because it felt like I was shouldering the emotional weight of the situation all on my own. Hence, over the years, I've learned my lessons and generally keep my mouth shut around Jasmine. It's not that I've stopped caring, but I've come to realize that interfering in her life only leads to more conflict. I've had to accept that she may never see me as a mother figure or even as someone who truly cares about her. Now I mostly stay out of her way unless she explicitly asks for my help. I still feel the weight of her resentment, but I've learned to live with it. 2 years ago, I lost my grandmother due to old age. She had always been more than just a grandparent to me. After losing my parents at a young age, my grandparents had stepped in and raised me. They had become the central figures in my life, and my bond with them was incredibly strong. As a result, my grandmother's death hit me hard. In her will, it was found that she had left her entire inheritance to me. I won't lie. The sum was a significant life-changing event. I had never anticipated this amount of money to just fall into my lap one day. With this inheritance, I knew that my son's future and mine was forever protected. I didn't have to worry about how we'd get by or whether I could afford to send him to college. For the first time in a long while, I felt like everything would be okay, financially speaking. However, the moment Alex found out about the inheritance, I noticed a shift in his attitude. He made it a point to dig around and ask a lot of questions: how much I'd received, where I planned on keeping the money, what I intended to do with it. At first, I didn't think much of it. I gave him only vague answers, telling him that I'd use the money as a retirement fund for myself and as a college fund for my son. I didn't go into too much detail because I didn't think I needed to. In my mind, this money was only for my child's future, but Alex clearly had other thoughts. A few days later, he told me that he had been thinking things over and he felt that it was unfair that I had the financial means to send our son to college, but Jasmine wouldn't have the same opportunity. He made it into a big deal, trying to frame it as if I was somehow morally obligated to pay for Jasmine's college education too just because I now had the money to do so. I was stunned. Jasmine had never treated me as a mother figure, and Alex himself had never truly positioned me as a co-parent in her life. I had always been more of a glorified caretaker in their eyes, there to provide stability in the household, but never seen as someone with any real authority or influence over Jasmine's upbringing. So I refused outright. I told Alex that I wasn't going to pay for Jasmine's college. How could he expect me to take on that responsibility when neither he nor Jasmine had ever acknowledged me as her parent in any meaningful way? Why should I fund her future when all this time they had kept me at arm's length? Both Alex and Jasmine tried to guilt-trip me, throwing around accusations like I was being a cruel person for not giving them some of my money, but I stood my ground. It wasn't my responsibility, and I wasn't going to let them manipulate me into thinking otherwise. Then not long after this confrontation, things took another downturn in our lives. Last year, Alex lost his job. Apparently, he got into a physical altercation at work. He punched a coworker, and that was the end of it. Instead of doing the responsible thing and immediately looking for a new job, Alex had been sitting at home ever since, claiming that he's trying to figure things out and that he just needs a break. It's been months, and he hasn't even started applying for new jobs. Meanwhile, he knows that I have more than enough money to cover all the household expenses, so he doesn't feel any urgency to contribute. He's completely checked out, relying on me to handle everything while he sits back. Knowing that he doesn't have to worry about a single penny is infuriating. I've been left to shoulder the full financial burden while Alex uses my inheritance as a safety net, knowing that I'll take care of things. But this wasn't how I envisioned my life, carrying all the weight while he drags his feet and refuses to step up. The resentment I feel towards him has only grown, especially as he continues to act like everything was fine, all while I was working full-time managing the house, raising our son, and supporting him too. A few months ago, we found out that Jasmine was pregnant with her boyfriend's child. In hindsight, maybe I should have seen this coming. Jasmine had been spending more time with her boyfriend than she had on her studies despite being in community college. It was obvious she wasn't taking her studies seriously, but I hadn't expected this. When the news came out, Jasmine was still living with us, and I knew that if she decided to keep the baby, the burden of caring for her child would somehow end up falling on me. I'd seen how irresponsible she could be, her lack of focus on school, her impulsiveness, her dependency on others to fix her mistakes. I could already imagine the future. Jasmine and her boyfriend going off to do whatever they wanted while leaving the baby with me to handle. I'd been there for her in many ways over the years, but I was not ready to take on the responsibility of raising her child on top of everything else I was already managing. So I made my position clear. I sat Alex down and firmly told him that if Jasmine decided to go through with the pregnancy, she would need to move out. I wasn't saying I wouldn't support her at all. I would help her financially if needed, offer advice and be there in whatever ways I could. But I drew a hard line when it came to living under the same roof. I didn't want to deal with a baby in the house. I couldn't take any more responsibility. especially when Alex had already been sitting around for months without contributing financially. The thought of adding a baby to the mix felt like the breaking point. To my relief, Alex actually agreed with me. He promised that he would talk to Jasmine and explain the situation to her. I wasn't sure how that conversation would go, but I was grateful that for once, he seemed to understand where I was coming from. About a week after Alex and I had that conversation about Jasmine needing to move out, he informed me that Jasmine had agreed to move out, but only on the condition that we help her with the transition. At first, I thought he meant helping her find a place or maybe offering a little financial support to get her started, but what he said next completely threw me off. He told me that Jasmine specifically wanted me to give her a portion of the inheritance I had received from my grandmother to help her get set up in life. I was floored. I couldn't believe that after everything, Jasmine thought it was appropriate to ask for my money. It got worse when Alex explained that Jasmine's boyfriend had bailed on her completely and didn't want anything to do with the baby. Now this was something that I didn't know, but I wasn't surprised since the guy did seem like a fool. She was about to become a single mom, and the weight of that reality hit me hard. Despite all the anger, frustration, and resentment I had built up over the years, I couldn't help but feel sorry for her. I knew how tough it was to raise a child even with support, and now she was facing it all alone with no reliable partner by her side. I knew she couldn't even find a decent job on her own due to her poor grades. My heart broke for her, and even though she had been a thorn in my side for so long, she was still family. So I said yes. Of course, we were going to help her. I couldn't turn my back on her in a time of need, no matter how difficult things had been between us. At the end of the day, I'm not a cold-hearted person. She was Alex's daughter, which made her part of my family too, whether I liked it or not. I knew that being a single mom was going to be an uphill battle for her, and despite my initial hesitation, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. That said, agreeing to help her financially didn't mean I was giving her free rein over the inheritance. I made it clear to Alex that I would help, but I wasn't about to hand over a large sum of money just because Jasmine demanded it. We needed to set boundaries and expectations for how this would work. I wasn't going to let her take advantage of the situation, and I wasn't going to compromise my son's future just to appease her. Alex agreed with me and seemed relieved that I had said I would help his daughter financially. However, the universe works in mysterious ways, because the day after Alex and I had the conversation about helping Jasmine financially, I found out something that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Alex had been applying for jobs finally after I had been pushing him for months to take action. His MacBook was open as he had taken a break to shower, and I thought I'd take this chance to review his latest resume and see if maybe I could help make any improvements or suggestions. But then out of nowhere, a message popped up from Jasmine on the screen. Curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked on it. What I read in that message changed everything. Apparently, Jasmine and Alex had been having a conversation about me. Jasmine had sent Alex a text mocking me, saying how dumb and easy I was for agreeing to give her money when they had just made that whole thing up. She even joked how they could have come up with more such plans a long time ago just to get me to pay them free money. My heart dropped when I read those words, but it didn't just end there. I started scrolling through their messages, and each one was worse than the last. They had been talking about me behind my back for God knows how long. The things they said were vile. They had been constantly making fun of me, insulting my character, and openly admitting that they were freeloading off me. Alex had bragged about how he didn't even have to lift a finger around the house because I was handling everything and paying all the bills. It was as though I was nothing more than a bank account to them. Someone to be used, manipulated, and laughed at behind closed doors. I felt utterly betrayed. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and the realization that the family I had been sacrificing for, people I had bent over backwards to help, were plotting against me. My stepdaughter and my husband were using me. They saw me as a joke. I was in shock, but I didn't want to confront Alex right then. I didn't want to listen to his excuses, to hear him stumble through some half-baked explanation. I was too hurt and too furious to face him, so I quietly took out my phone, snapped photos of their messages as evidence, and packed a few things. I took my son, and while Alex was still upstairs in the shower, I left the house. This time, I had no intention of ever coming back. I came straight to my friend's place as I needed space to process everything. She is just as taken aback as I am after seeing all the messages. After a few hours, when Alex realized I was gone, my phone started ringing non-stop. He kept calling, probably confused as to where I was and why I'd left. Eventually, I texted him, letting him know I was at my friend's place and that I just needed a break for myself. I assured him that Arson was safe and sound with me. Of course, he kept pushing for answers, asking why I had left so suddenly without informing him, but I didn't elaborate any further. Not yet. Right now, I need time to think, to figure out what to do next. After seeing those messages, after learning how little respect they had for me, I'm not sure I can ever go back to the life we had. Ida, If I leave my ungrateful unemployed husband, update 1. For everyone asking why I let my husband live off me, I want to clarify that I never thought he was using me. I mean, people lose their jobs, and he's always gone back and forth between jobs. However, this time, it had been a long time, and I honestly thought he would eventually find one. Also, after getting my inheritance, I had no issues paying the bills, but now I wish I hadn't. Update 2. 2 days later, after spending time reflecting at my friend's place and talking things out with her, I knew it was time for me to confront Alex. I couldn't let him and Jasmine manipulate or guilt-trip me any longer. When I walked back into the house, Alex was home, and I could tell from the look on his face that he had been worried about me. He probably sensed something was wrong, but he had no idea that I knew everything. I sat down across from him trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger bubbling under the surface and told him bluntly that I knew everything. I went to tell him that I had seen the messages between him and Jasmine. I knew how they had been talking about me behind my back, mocking me, laughing at my expense, and openly admitting that they were freeloading off my hard-earned money. The color drained from his face, and I could see panic flash in his eyes. At first, Alex tried to fight back, saying that neither he nor his daughter really meant those words and that they were just venting or joking. He claimed that this is how he and Jasmine bonded and that they hadn't realized how hurtful their messages would come across. He also apologized for lying about his daughter's boyfriend leaving her and tried to justify his actions by saying he just wanted his daughter to have some money to start fresh, claiming that he knew I wouldn't have offered her anything otherwise, but I wasn't having any of it. I had spent too long sacrificing myself only to be treated like I was nothing more than a doormat. I told him firmly and without hesitation that I was done with both of them. This marriage was over. I told him we would be getting a divorce and there was nothing he could say to change my mind. That's when Alex went from trying to explain himself to becoming aggressive, almost desperate. He started raising his voice, telling me how he couldn't afford to live in this house on his own, how he'd go broke without me since he still didn't have a job. He ranted about how Jasmine still needed my money for her baby and could never afford